Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman, and I'm here with Damien Edwards, and we're going to try something because we did some live coding with our friend Jan a couple of days ago, where we did some work in Go and we learned how to use Visual Studio Code with Live Share and Docker. So I thought that if you all like these kinds of things, we'd solve some real problems. So, Damo, here is a real problem that I have. I'm going to share my screen here,
Right.
and I'm going to say AzureFriday.com. This is a website that I built with my buddy in Nigeria, and we went and made AzureFriday.com. Currently, right now, goes to an Azure website. When I get it working perfectly, I'll make the domain go to the right place.
All right.
Okay, so my buddy and I, Oluwa and I made this website, and this would go and take a feed from Channel 9. It would take a feed from Channel 9 and then load it up into a single JSON file, hold it in memory, and we had this really cool JavaScript client-side thing where I could start typing and it would immediately search, and it was super fast because there's only 700 episodes. And 700, is like a meg. It's nothing. It was nothing, right? And here's what the URL used to look like. Okay, you would go to channel9.msdn/API. I had a GUID, and then I worked with the Channel 9 team, and they added a thing called format equals taco because they had paging. And I'm not a fan of paging APIs. I have 700 episodes of Azure Friday. I don't want to get it 30 at a time. Okay, here's where things go south. We click on that right now. It redirects because Channel 9 has joined Microsoft Learn, and over the next several months, they're going to be, fixing a lot of these redirects. But the point is, in the short term, it broke my my little, fun website here. So I called our friends over there and asked them for some advice. And here's a piece of the email here. So let's kind of parse this a bit. You can use the docs hierarchy service to fetch a list of episodes for the show. So the show still exists. You have a API/whatever/episodes, but it has paging.
Yep.
Okay, so page 0 to whatever. We'll learn about that. The service has a page size limit of 30. Then they said, yeah, you can diagnose distancing cross for origin, whatever. Let's take a look at this URL here and see what we're dealing with. So I drop that in. JSON view, so it's a little bit prettier here. We'll zoom in a little bit more. And it looks like you've got an entry ID, a title, a URL. Presumably the base of this URL is docs.microsoft.com/. So we can test that by going docs.microsoft.com/. That in fact works. So now that's going to dictate our link. What we don't have is, I don't see any MP4 files here. I don't see any iframes or anything like that. Okay.
Yep.
I don't see a thumbnail, which I would love to have.
There's no media at all.
No media. So it says to get the media, you take the entry ID and you fan out. So here's some media. This is like a document, right? This is a document database. So this is all the information about the document. And here we go. Look at that. Captions, thumbnails, view URL, all the stuff that we need, which is great. But now I have to go and dig those things out.
Right.
So what was a simple GET call to a REST API now turns into a kind of Cartesian product of explosion of REST calls.
Cascading calls.
Cascading calls, indeed. Now, that's a really common problem. I think people have these issues, happen. This is just part of life. Now, they do offer a batch thing where I could say, here's one ID and another ID.
Okay.
But
That's
I have a tendency.
API.
Yeah, I have a tendency to abuse APIs.
Okay.
And, of course, the obvious next step is, I'll just put a URL with 700 entry IDs, concatenate it at the end. That'll be fine, right? But no doubt that'll break something and it makes someone angry, right? But it does work for 2. Okay.
And it does give you the metadata still that you would
need. And
it
does give me the metadata. It's literally a batch API.
Okay.
Okay, so that's good information. So if we go back here, because one of the things is you don't just start coding, you got to do the analysis, right? If we look at the first page, it looks like we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. What do we got here? A ton. Maybe we're getting 30. No, not that many, actually.
You could stick it in VS Code and search for UID, and you would get the number of instances of your UID would give you the episode count. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where it's like, do you go to Postman? Do you go to Nightingale? Do you go to Curl? Like, what I want is the length of the episodes array. So I could go in here.
Yeah.
I could go and drop in that URL. I could hit go. It says page size 30. Now this says episode count 351. There's supposed to be 700 episodes. I'll deal with that later.
Okay.
What I want is that length. How did you think I could get it?
I would take the content and put it in VS Code and then do a string search on UID, because there's one instance of that per episode.
Oh, okay.
You know, the property name there.
Okay, so let's do this. And let's make a new folder, or a new file rather. Drop it in.
And I'd search for the,
how many UIDs are
quote
there?
UID quote, just to make
32.
sure you're not. Yeah, well, 32. The page size is 30, so that makes sense. Then you might be getting a couple of other hits.
No, it's 30 with quotes.
Yeah, there you go.
So in their context, page size is a maximum of 30 episodes. Yeah. So we're going to have to call that, 700 divided by 30 times to go and figure that out.
Do you know why the total's wrong, or are you just not worried about it right now?
It's more likely that they have picked a date, an arbitrary date, like 2009 or something, and just said, we're not going to show any of these old ones. It could be that they retired things that were old or used the old version of the portal or whatever. It's half of the episodes are there, half are not. Could be any number of reasons. But I'm assuming that as new episodes come in, that'll change.
Okay.
What we need to do then is grab to start one page. If I go and say page 1, there we go. So here's the next 30, page 1, page 2, and I just keep the page size. So it's nice. I can just put a page number here.
Did you get docs for the max page size, or did you already figure that out? Or?
No, this was given as an example in an email.
Okay, so can you just change it to 50 and see what happens?
That's a good question. So let's go and say page 0. Page 700. I was told in the docs that it is, page size exceeds max value of 30. It is a good error. It's very nice.
Can you, the next thing I would try is go to your batch. Have you got the batch ones?
Well, before we do that, I'm going to pick a page way outside.
Okay. See what fails.
So we'll get an empty array if we go outside. So we know when to stop.
Yep.
We go until we hit an empty array.
Oh, that's interesting. Go back to, so this one, go to the bottom. Okay, scroll, just collapse episodes. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so they're not doing what is you sometimes see in APIs, like hypermedia style APIs.
Yep.
Where they'll
give you
proper
the URL
REST
API
to the next page.
Next. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so they're not doing that. Okay, so we've come up with the mechanism. So if we
which is a great point, and let's just make sure that we hit that again for folks that are listening. In a classical REST API, you'd have a next link and previous link at the bottom with a URL, and you'd simply follow it. You'd teach your thing to go next until there was no more next.
Maybe I'm not sure if I'm not sure if that's I would call that classical, but I
think that was in Fielding's original paperwork.
The hypermedia style API where you're expected to navigate around. The API space effectively, based on URLs or URIs, like you said.
Good point.
But okay.
So we go and do n number of those. So then the question is, I'm thinking, if I get 30 per, can I take the batch example here, which is using 2, and let's make an example of that times 15.
So first thing I would try, can you hit batch without the IDs property?
Ooh, okay.
Just to see what it says.
Validation errors. IDs field is required. These are great error messages.
This is wonderful. Can you give it an IDs that isn't a valid ID? See what happens? Nice. Okay.
Lovely.
Very good.
Yeah. So then let's do this. Let's take IDs. Let's add a comma at the end. That is 2 batch IDs. that's not very helpful. Why are you doing that? I just want this. What's happening? Switch. So this editor is not working for me. Let's go over here.
What are you actually trying to do? I'm not even sure what you're trying to do.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to fake a call with 30 IDs to see if I can do
Are you just going to give it?
I'm going to get the same 2 IDs over and over again.
I wonder.
So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 22, 4, 6, 8, 30.
I'm going to assume
now
you're
30
going to get
IDs right there. I know, but I want to see if they're smart.
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh my. Okay, they're not.
They're not smart.
Those.
But they allowed 30.
Well, it didn't fail. You should verify that there is actually 30.
Good point. So let's go and take the result of that. To your point.
Do the same.
Again, do it in Nightingale, do it anywhere. It's a pretty funky URL. Take the raw stuff, bring it back in. And I'm sure that there's better ways. Someone's going to be watching this and say, use sed, use awk, use regex, you learn Vim,
like
you poser.
curl, pipe to this, pipe to that.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, those are called ID, not UID, so it's a little harder to count them. There you go. That's unique. There's 30 of them. So it did return 30. So we've confirmed a couple of things here. We've confirmed that they have a batch thing, so we can call this n times, and for each page, grab the thumbnail and or the thing. I think we'll just get the thumbnail and send them to the page. So all we need are ID, name, text, thumbnail, that comes from elsewhere. I don't know how to spell thumbnail. And that's basically it. So the URL then we can get up top. That media one is going to require this. So we need 30, we need one call and then another call for the batch.
Yeah.
One main call, one batch, and then we do that n times where n is, max pages divided by 30. So in this context, 15 times this call and 15 times that call.
Max episode count divided by 30?
Yeah, max episode count, sorry.
Yeah. And this is
I thought it was 700, but it's going to be 350. So that's not too bad. So it's better than we thought. It'll be 15 calls twice.
Yep.
Make sense? So here's the thing that we want our new and early in career people to understand. Certainly you and I are seasoned, I will say, as a reasonable statement, but certainly not experts. This is a number one thing when you're doing this kind of analysis. We've been very systematic. We've tested our edge cases. We've said, well, this is a good idea, that's a good idea, things like that. But what we aren't recognizing yet is that there's 50 ways to do this, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a super important thing for people to understand. You don't have to do it.
One more edge case before we move on.
Yeah. And actually, before we do that, you know what I just realized? This is a silly thing, little detail. I'm going to flip myself.
Okay.
I'm flipping myself horizontally because when I point, I want to point here. And before I was looking away.
That's funny. Yes, that's good.
Okay. What would you want to test?
Let's just see. I'm going to assume that the batch is limited or maybe not to the same page size. Can you make it 31 instead of 30?
Ooh, that's a great one. That would be a very interesting thing because then you might be limited to the size of a URL, which is 2K.
Right. It depends on the browser technically, but 2K at least usually.
There's 31.
So it didn't fail.
Okay, that's interessante. Might the batch API support more? Could we send 340 there?
That's what I'm wondering.
Oh my goodness. Which is great because it'll work until it totally doesn't
31.
work. Wow. All right. Well, so then we have to go and break it even more.
Yes. Now put 300 in and see what you can.
There's 30, comma,
60,
31.
Oh, 31.
31,
okay.
62, 93.
Awesome. That should be fun.
Add request. Might be that last comma. No, didn't like it.
Oh, interesting. And notice it sent you back an HTML response. Like we really broke it.
Yeah, well, that's a 500 basically. Somebody way earlier, probably Azure front door,
some front end,
or some ingress was like, no. So let's
just
cut
randomly
that in
start
half.
chopping bits off. Yeah.
Start chopping. No. Or I made a mistake in my pasting.
It's possible. I mean, it's just a URL though. These are just query string values. So
pretty long though. 404.
Interesting.
Getting different errors as it gets longer and longer. And at this point, you don't know how many servers are. Oh, now I may have been blocked. The resource has been removed. Its name's changed. Are you mad at me now?
There's a very good chance that it. Whoops.
I may have been blocked by Azure Front Door at this point.
It thinks you're mounting a denial of service.
We're back. We're back. Yeah, they definitely don't like that.
Maybe let's just try 50.
I think I made a mistake. No, I don't think I made a pasting mistake.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we shouldn't try our luck with.
I mean, we know 31 works. Maybe we can just be happy that we've got the page size working, and we'll just go with that.
I mean, we could probably go 50 or 60 or whatever, but at some point we're going to anger the beast.
Yeah.
But then again, to juxtapose this thing I was saying before about how there's lots of ways to do this, and this is where I think I get a little analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
Because I could do this in PowerShell. I could do this as a series of bash scripts. What's the goal here?
Right.
Is this a dynamic API where I fake the old API and try to then fan out to hundreds of others? Or is this a job that runs, once a day or once a week? My perspective is, in the short term, it'll be a console app. In the long term, maybe we'll make it an Azure function or a cron job or something that runs in the background. I think what we could do is assemble a JSON file that is roughly shaped the way we want it. And once a week or whenever a show is published, drop it into storage and grab it out of storage.
Yep.
That would be a reasonable thing. But I want to make sure that you agree that to our new early in career people who are watching, that's just one person's opinion, right? Could be different ways. I mean, I'm sure you can think of different ways to go.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, everything is a trade-off. So, and then once you've decided what set of trade-offs you want to make, then you can narrow it down to, I could then implement it whatever amount of ways, but still have those trade-offs be what they are, and then optimize or whatever it might be after that. But the trade-off of doing this rather than doing this in reaction to an event or in real time, like the query comes in and then you fan out, which is like the easiest way to think about it, obviously. Right. I don't need any other infrastructure. The request comes in and my code runs because I already have code that runs per request. But then you're like, well, that's too much. I only really need the data to be as fresh as once a week. But then you've got to deal with the other side of the problem, which is, well, what's running this code now? Because it's not my request anymore.
Right.
And does that ever need to be invalidated? And so, cache invalidation effectively becomes one of the hardest problems in computer science, is now something you have to deal with. And so that's kind of, for me, that's like the upfront binary trade-off that you have to make. Now, it's pretty clear, like, because as you said, there's probably 100 ways we could have it update every week. So that seems like clearly the right way to go.
Right.
But we need to solve this, like, well, who's going to produce this file? Is it done as part of the build and deployment process? Is it done via some batch that's run by some other mechanism? Like, if it's
is it done at the startup of my
Is it
web
done
app?
at startup, right? Exactly.
So my web app could do this. There's a thing in ASP.NET, background worker service, I could have running, where the site itself on startup could cache it locally and save it on local storage, sitting right, not even Azure storage, but on disk. Start up and say, oh, did I know about this? I will take the 10 minutes or the 5 minutes or whatever. I'll make 50 calls. I'll get the stuff. I'll save the thing. And then every N hours, days, whatever, I'll update it. That's fine.
So, and then if we wanted to, I could enumerate the types of things that I think could go wrong with that. So does your web app have write access to the folder that it's running from?
Right. Am I running in a container?
Right. Are you in a container? When will it ever get overridden or overwritten or deleted as part of normal processes? Maybe if the machine restarts, if the container restarts, what happens
or
if
is
you
it being
redeploy
read
a
to?
new version?
Is it being read to while being simultaneously written to?
Are there
and
concurrency
I get a partial,
issues?
Yeah, the concurrency issues. That's a great point.
answering all those answers, or like, going through the thought experiments for each one of those, will help you further refine. Well, okay, maybe the answer is yes to one of those, but I can circumvent that by doing this, and now we've got something waterproof, and still relatively simple, because we've only really gone 2 branches down the thought process tree so far, and we've got something that meets what we want.
And relatively simple is another thing, because one person's relatively simple, maybe their skill level, another person's might not. So, for example, issues of concurrency and asynchrony, that's something that you're better at than I am. So if I were to do a naive implementation of this, I would probably write a couple of nested for loops. I would describe a projection or a view model of my idealized system. I'd make a list of Azure Friday shows, and I would make these calls completely synchronously, one at a time, deserialize them, and then go left hand, right hand. I'd go, here's the thing from the Docs API, make an Azure Friday show, put it in a list. And I would do that. Knowing, however, that the correct way is to do some naive parallelism, where I'd say, send out 30 threads simultaneously to go and do this, and then await them all.
See, the use of the word correct there is still somewhat bothersome, because
correct, because I feel less than, because I don't want to do it intuitively.
But it all comes back to trade-offs. And so by choosing, for example, to introduce parallelism, you're going to use more resources of some sort while doing so. Maybe you don't want to burn through that many outgoing requests from wherever you're hosting this, or CPU cycles, or whatever it might be.
Or I don't know, like I may have had a malformed URL a moment ago when we saw me get blocked, or I could have upset an ingress somewhere.
That's
I
right.
could have triggered something.
Rate limiting. Yeah.
Rate limiting, throttling. We don't know if I decided to go from hello to 50 gets all at once. Do I need to stagger them? Are they going to start to block my IP address? These questions, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these questions are the difference between later in career and early in career engineers, and the only way you do it is by suffering. Well, I have been rate limited before, and that's why I think about it.
When you say the only way of doing it, only way of kind of getting to that point is suffering, people often say that learning is all about failing and then trying again. Yeah. And it's very hard to learn and grow if you don't fail. You don't learn anything from success, you learn from failure. And that takes time. That is simply a factor of time, and then what you do with that time. And so if you are constantly failing and you do it for 20 years, then you can retain at least some knowledge about, you can remember, I remember I did a thing once and it caused this type of issue. Yeah. That's as specific it has to be. You don't have to know what API you called. There's docs for all that stuff, right? Or other people you can ask. But if you can at least retain the failure modes that you've encountered over time, it will become easier to do this type of thinking while designing or feeling out a potential solution for something.
So what do you do if you're not one of us who's got some time in the business and are also kind of dudes of some renown, and you do a YouTube about this problem, and all the comments are like, you poser, you didn't use this library. You poser, you didn't do asynchrony, right? I'm Hanselman, maybe I can get away with it, but somebody else might then get discouraged. How many negative comments about you suck, that was the wrong way, chase you out of tech? And you just go like, fine, I guess this is not for me. I must be doing it wrong. I know in my heart of hearts that I wish I could write perfect asynchronous thread safe intelligent code that fanned out and used the resources properly. I know I could do it, but I know I could write naive code quicker.
Right.
But if I did that, someone might judge me, and they might say that's amateurish. Yeah. That's not production ready.
This is kind of one of the challenges with putting content out there, like you're talking about, is that it doesn't allow for the type of iteration that really is what we all rely on to get to our ultimate solution, which is correct for the set of trade-offs that we currently have made and the conditions that we are currently experiencing. Something that is correct today can be wrong next week when you run a promotion and now you've got 10 times as much traffic to your site. It worked perfectly well up until that point, and you've made the right set of trade-offs. And to fix it might require a complete re-architecture. It might require introducing something more complicated like you're talking about. And in fact, what you said before about writing, going back to, hey, in this case, let's write something to disk. that introduces issues of concurrency with regards to scale out. Well, what if you want to use one of your cloud providers features to go from one instance to two instances to handle traffic? Well, which one is writing? Are they both making 50 requests each and then saving to their own disk, or you're going to somehow move that to someone else's sort of problem domain now, and then have those two nodes read from that? And
a naive, and when I say naive, that's not a negative word. It is it is a simplistic, reasonable way of doing things. Could say, well, if I'm going to fan out to 2, that's fine. If I'm going to fan out to 200, I probably don't want 200 nodes making 50 calls at the same time. But then someone might say, you need Redis. Do you?
So it's interesting, like what you just said then, even. There's almost step functions, right, where you can introduce or think about will going from 1 to 2 cause a problem? So doing things with one CPU, with one instance of your app, where you've got infinite time to have the app boot up, basically anything goes. Right. And then you go, well, I don't have infinite time. I want the app to boot up in less than 30 seconds and have everything. Okay, well, you've introduced a restriction. Let's see what changes as a result of that. Well, the obvious next one, maybe we've got 2 CPUs now instead of 1, so we've got a bit of real parallelism. But once you go to 2 instances of the app from 1, that changes a bunch of things.
Yep.
And so there's a pretty decent step function to think about. But then, as you just said, what about going to 200? Well, going from 2 to 5 probably won't change much. Or 2 to 10, but this whole orders of magnitude way of thinking. What about 2 to 20? Well, now it starts to feel a bit icky because of what you just said. I'm hitting it with 20 times as much traffic.
Right.
In the bad situation, for example, I had to reboot my web farm all of a sudden.
Right. Well, a senior engineer would say from 2 to 200, that's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
Do you have that problem? I do not. Right. So the pragmatist, the practical perspective would be, well, have one of them do the job, or have a separate sidecar process do the job, save it in storage,
right,
and then pick it up. And I love this acronym here, YAGNI, right?
Yep.
You aren't going to need it. Like, it's a great problem to have. Do you really have that problem? And I think that point of how could someone get that thing done so quickly? Because they limited their scope. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of ways to solve this in any different language, in any different way. But quick and dirty, right? What do they say? You can have it good, fast, or cheap. Pick 2.
Yeah, there's the classic triangle, and you pick 2.
So we've only got a little bit of time. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into. Is that okay with you? All right. So we determined, I believe, before that we can go and get the episodes with this right here. So we're just doing this in Visual Studio, and we've got a .NET 6 console app, and we've got a URL template here that is going to be what is that? We'll call it whatever. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. We can go and say, this is actually kind of cool, by the way. If you spend a lot of time with the IntelliCode stuff, it kind of freaks me out.
Yeah, it's on in mine, and when I'm coding, it suggests some pretty
It makes suggestions, and I have mixed feelings about them. Some of them, they're like, yeah, convenient. I was making a URI, and you guessed that probably because I put the word URL, in this. So then I look at this URL right here, and I realize that that's the thing that's going to change.
Yep.
Right. That's the thing. I'm used to doing stuff like that.
Yep.
I don't know if that's the right way to do it. And then put a, what is it, like this?
Yep, so that's an interpolated string.
I don't know why it turned color there. Already it's mad at me. It's not a real URL. Maybe I would keep it as a string for now.
Right.
And then make it a URL when I have a proper one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why our syntax highlighting is salty, but that's still a thing, right? I'm going to change that at some point. And then we had our batch. I think we felt pretty good about that batch, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
And that was going to be just comma separated entries. I don't know if it's going to be 0 or we're going to, how we're going to concatenate these things. Who knows, right? Who knows? All right. So sometimes people in .NET have said that it's historically been a little bit confusing about which HTTP client to use. It depends on how long you've been in it. Maybe now it's easier. I would honestly at this point go and Google, and I might use HTTP client, but maybe there's a new one. What's the right way to do a simple get
HTTP
these
client.
days? HTTP client.
Yeah, HTTP client's still the default answer. Where it gets a little more complicated is if you've got an existing code base that was around since before HTTP client existed, or if you are running in a server application where you have to managing the lifetime of HTTP client object instances actually becomes something you have to worry about, because one, they might be expensive. Two, you have to worry about things like DNS caching and reuse. And so we have some higher level types that you can use to help manage those things for you.
Okay. I typed HTTP client. You notice that it says system.net.http. It's automatically turned green, indicating that namespace is in scope. That's because we have global usings or global namespaces. You may be familiar with .NET applications that have a whole bunch of usings at the top, and you'd type HTTP client, you'd hit Control dot, and then it would add a using statement. But there's a bunch of defaults, and certainly system.net.http is available to us by default. So I'm presuming that's why I got success early on, right?
Yeah.
And I hit enter, and our IntelliCode suggests a base address.
Right.
Which is interesting. And it even goes so far as to take one of our existing URLs
right,
and bring that in, which is pretty darned interesting, which then implies I could go and format this in a couple of different ways, right? I could do, in the old days, I would do something like, was it string.format? But how would I do that these days? Like here, I would go like this.
So in this case, the base address, it would typically be like the server, just the server address. So your HTTPS docs.microsoft.com/. So if you think back to when we were looking at the document being returned, the URL that would give you for each episode did not include that part.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's very common because you might be calling this API in different environments, or indeed the code doesn't know necessarily where it's running, right? It's just, it's running and you got to it from docs.microsoft.com because that's production, but it doesn't know that. That was terminated at some server 4 layers ahead of where the app is running. And then the only way it would know that is to investigate or sniff the incoming URL. So typically it's, you choose your base and then you go from there.
Okay. So in this case, it might be staging, it might be dev, it could be local host if we were going to practice things as well. And then we can keep off the slash or not. It depends on what we're using to put our URLs together, but the implication will be that a slash will be added when I
if you use the right API to join it together.
If I use the right API. So something to think about. Always think about your slashes. Are you going to end up with not enough or too many? Just be conscious of that, right? Okay, cool. So then what would we do with our client? We've got gets, we've got get async, we've got get string, we've got stuff like this that we can just so in. We used to have back in the day just gets, but now everything's async these days. And I know I want to get a string. I should just get used to that.
Yeah. For HTTP client in particular, there is a synchronous version available. I don't know much about it because I don't use it, but there is a synchronous version available. These methods here are basically convenience methods that hang off HTTP client that effectively internally are calling a bunch of other methods on your behalf to set up the request, populate the request body if there needs to be, the headers, send the request, then wait for a response to come back, read the response headers, and then finally read the content of the response body in whatever form is required for the method you called. In the case of get stream, it would give you back a stream. In the case of get string, it's just going to give you back the raw contents as a string. So.
Now, when I'm going to go and call this, I'm going to go and ask something like this. This is the structure.
Yep.
I've got this document that includes total count, an array of episodes, where an episode includes a number of things, some of which I can probably ignore, don't really care about, a couple of other that I want. Do I need to make an object that is shaped like this, and how correctly shaped like this does it need to be?
So this is where you could go a few different ways, right? You could decide to basically work in raw JSON and do everything in JSON without creating types to represent.
When you say work in raw JSON, you mean like it's a document object model and pull it out loosely typed?
Yes, I mean, you could be really raw and just work with it as a string.
Oh no, yeah, I would prefer not to look. So that's a great point. Actually, let's talk about that for a second. You're initially saying get, and then it's like, well, get what?
Get byte array async, right? That's the lowest level.
Unlikely that you want to do that if you're thinking about a high level problem. You might think get a string, but then is it really my job to be a JSON parser right now?
Right.
Depends on the complexity of the JSON. Right. If it's just one value you want to get, yeah, maybe you could do that. But there's all kinds of things that get handled for you, and encoding and date times and things that can be made smarter if you decide, are you working at the byte level, the string level, the JSON level, the object level? Do you just want deserialized objects to pop out the other end?
Right. And then there's the question of, is this streaming or is it non-streaming, I guess? Is it a single atomic sort of operation where you send the request and then you get back? You don't get anything until you get everything.
Right. This is a non-streaming operation, meaning I do a get and I get back something and it finishes.
Right, which means that you're going to have that everything that comes back has to be stored in memory, so it can be given to you as the return, the result of the method that you're going to call, and you can stick it in a variable. If you're dealing with APIs that return very large things, sometimes they'll support streaming, and so you'll actually write your code in a fairly different manner, where you might give it a method that gets called over and over as new results come back from the initial call. In this case, we don't have to worry about that. It's the simplest thing we could do is just get string async, give it a method like we were doing in the browser before, a URL, I should say, and verify that we're actually getting back the body that we were seeing before.
Now, in this case, this is an interpolated string. I would.
Oh, yeah. So that interpolation. What is it that you're attempting to do there exactly?
Well, so in the old days, I would go like this,
right,
and then I would pass in page number.
Right.
But in the world of interpolated strings, I'll make a copy of this section here, and I'll say, what if this was, hey, this is a string where that's an actual value.
Right.
If I had a value like int page number equals 0, then I want this to be page num. I might want to feel like I want to use the modern way to do things, and I'm not sure how to format that.
So you're running into it. So what you have done up top is you've used the old ordinal style format, but you've declared it as a interpolated string. Now, but this you can't pass page number there because it has to be a valid symbol.
Right, and it is down here, which means I can move it up.
Right,
but I don't know when this evaluation happens.
It happens at the time that the string is created.
Yeah, which is not the time I want.
Right.
So then maybe this is not what I need.
Right.
So it is appropriate to use the older style string format.
In this case, the other way you could do this is because you know that it's a collection of things being passed to the query string.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a query string collection effectively where you just set the value of the one that you want every time and then ask the URI class to produce you the output every time. But
I don't feel bad about
10
that.
20 ways to do stuff.
Yeah, I don't feel bad about that. I just don't feel modern about that. You know what I mean? And these are things where
doing string.format
makes me feel a little old school.
Yeah, so maybe. So like you need to remove the $sign from the beginning of your string literal declarations.
This is no longer an interpolated string. It's just a string it's a string that happens to have something in there.
A placeholder.
And this replaces the placeholder. Or ordinally, in order.
Right.
Okay? Cool. And this is unused, and that's why they're mad at me right there. And I know that I could right-click and run this, but I also like to go and say, do things from the terminal myself. So I'm just going to go and say cd in here. And then we can probably .NET watch this at some point, can't we?
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Look at that. So there's some JSON right there at the command line. And at this point, I might want to use a JSON prettier, right, and run that through. I think what is it called, JQ, or one of the JSON prettiers at the command line. Have you ever used those JSON beautifiers?
No. Nice.
So I know you're not as much a a command line person as I am. I'm kind of obsessed with the command
Well,
line.
when I do, I tend to use PowerShell, and so I rely
Oh
on
yeah,
the functions in there.
right. So I could go and make a call, .NET run. That's going to spit out a bunch of JSON. Then I could .NET run and then paste it into, I think, is it format JSON? I'm off. I would be off Googling for this stuff.
Right.
And figuring out like, so here I am. Now we're Googling at scale. JSON, beautifier, PowerShell. Prettified JSON in PowerShell, convert to JSON, convert from JSON. Yeah, that's basically what they're doing. There's a thing called JQ that's actually better for this, which is just a Linux-based prettifier. All this is going to do, though, is chop it up like this.
Yep.
So we stuck it in and then spit it back out, and that it didn't color it, but at least it told us that we got back what we wanted. So that's cool. Okay, so we return back here, and again, I could do this. I could actually, if I wanted to, do like a read line. This was a problem I was trying to solve it, for a long period of time, and I could say while true.
Yeah.
And then we could do a hot reload or something, and then just keep making changes and iterate more quickly. We'd have to move it outside of the main.
Yeah,
so that it was
put it into its own
it would work, but you get the idea. But that worked right off the bat. But we're returning a string. We haven't got any objects, to your point. So then do we want to deal with raw JSON, or do we want to do something else? Because right now we really don't need a lot. Like, I don't necessarily feel that I need to model a bunch of stuff. There was a thing back in the XML world called XPath. I know that there are JSON equivalents where you can just pluck out the two little nuggets that you need.
Yep.
What do you think? I need title. I need URL. I'm going to need entry ID and description for later.
So if you had JPath
Four
support,
things.
in theory, I've never used JPath, JSON path, but it's the spiritual equivalent of XML path, XSLT type stuff, if I understand it. And so you could, in theory, just use a JSON deserializer that supports JSON path, which System.Text.json doesn't yet. They're looking at it for .NET 7, but JSON.NET does. And
there is a system.text.json.node. There's a thing, right? So we could try that.
That would allow you to work with this as like you said before, as a structured document, effectively. So rather than being a string, you would create a JSON document from this string, and then you would move around in it using that. And that's probably the easiest thing to understand. You don't have to learn a new syntax, which JSON path would be. You just move around inside of it logically based on the structure of it.
Let's try it, not knowing what we're doing, because it's fun to try those things, and we only have a little bit of time. So JSON.nodes node. That's what it's called. Or am I not getting my?
That's a type name. You just want the namespace.
Oh, that's a type name? No, I think it's a. You sure? 99% sure it's not.
Well, the compiler agrees with me, so.
Yeah, touche. Could have sworn that was a thing. Let's find out. Nodes.
Ah, there you go.
Plural. There, that's what. So we were both right.
Do you actually need that namespace just to get the document, though?
Looks like it's not necessary because it's available to everybody. So that's already not needed. So that's kind of cool. So then what we could potentially do then is say var, JSON object equals JSON node dot. No, that's saying it is. Oh, it wasn't necessary because I hadn't needed it yet.
You hadn't used it yet. That's right.
I hadn't used it yet. So then we'll pull out foo. I'll move that down here. Okay. And then now we've got this JSON object that's been pulled out of this string.
So can I ask you why you wouldn't just start with JSON document rather than diving straight into JSON node?
I would probably say ignorance on my part.
Okay, so there is a JSON document class, which is in the root namespace, System.Text.json namespace, rather than the nodes namespace. And I don't know what JSON document offers me yet.
Okay. So what does that offer me?
Well, that's like XML document. So cast your mind back 15, 20 years. You would start saying I have a document that is JSON, which is the response that you got, right?
And that is different than a node. How?
It's not necessarily a node represents anything in the JSON tree, anything at all, right? So a JSON node would be a property name is a valid JSON node.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that may only be a symbol, but it depends on how they've structured their compiler and their,
Right.
syntax tree.
Okay. Well, one idea, if I were alone to go and learn this, is I'd put a breakpoint on here.
Yeah.
And I'd hit F5. And we'll drop in a debugger real quick here. And I'll just hover over them and I'll see which one feels friendlier. All right. Oops, I need one more line to make sure that I don't actually finish, because this thing just stopped on that last line. So we'll hit F5 again. Okay, so now I have two objects.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a JSON document right here. Oops, I'm trying to zoom in. Let's try this again. There we go. It looks like it's got a root element, and I can see the JSON inside of it. I'm not seeing a lot of, I'm not seeing the DOM the way I would expect to like wander around inside of that DOM. That might be my own ignorance speaking. While a JSON object, which is a JSON node, that looks immediately friendly to me.
Interesting. Is
there a particular thing that you think that we would do on JSON document that would be more friendly than my?
Yeah, it is literally just what I would have started with. Like I'm trying to click around in it now. Like typically the document APIs, you'll get a document structure, you'll get the root element property, which is where you would navigate from. But I didn't see what it was giving you underneath root element.
Well,
root element will usually have some type, whatever the root element was.
Let's humor me for a second, because why not, right? And I'll just put them next to each other, and we'll say JSON object, and I'll say episodes. No, excuse me, that was already parsed. JSON object at 0. No, that doesn't feel right. Does it add episodes at 0? You're in there too, by the way.
Yeah, honestly, my machine is having a whole bunch of hard time right now for some reason.
That's okay.
But I'm watching yours.
JSON object at 2. The first one gives me episodes, which then has a JSON array. So right now we see that there's the JSON count. So we can go and say int total count. Or, again, there's always the whole religious argument about that versus var. At 0. And then there's var, and actually probably more like for each, right? Look at that. Look at that Intella what's it? Isn't that funny? Where item is probably going to be that'll be a JSON array. We'll have to tell it more information. And that'll probably be another JSON object underneath there. And then at this point, I might want to just spit it out one at a time. I'm just kind of like getting a sense of what's going on here.
Yeah.
Feeling weird about this because it's not null here. They don't have the ability to enumerate, but I know that there's an array here. It is in fact a JSON array. I have to say as array in order to do that.
There we go.
Okay. Let's hit F5. So I pull out my JSON object. We came back JSON object at 0, which is called total count, which means I need to ask for it by name. I can't just pull it out and assume that it's going to get what I want, it looks like. So when I want to ask something of it, it sounds like I need to be a little bit more specific using this API.
No. Well, okay. What I saw looked much more like the exception assistant was showing you the exception on the wrong line.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the exception message you got was that the type of the thing that you're trying to pull out must be of array, which I would have thought there's not going to be line 21 that's the problem. It would be line 22 where you're trying to get it as an array.
Let's find out.
But we'll see what happens. Right.
Node must be of type JSON array. So JSON object right here at 0 is, what is that?
You'll need to use the locals window. I don't think you can see it in.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll come down here. Oops. I always hate that. Now I've angered the beast.
It's like, which one of those 6 boxes does it go in?
Yeah, exactly. So we've got JSON object right here at 0. It's nodes. It's another JSON object, right? So it's a hash table of hash tables. And then it has 0, 0. This feels maybe a little bit more loosely typed than I'm used to.
Well, this is big, and this length goes back to my initial sort of surprise at using nodes, because in my mind, like walking this using nodes, it means you're literally going node by node by node in the JSON.
I was hoping I'd be able to do something, friendlier, and I might still be. People are probably watching and saying, "No, you dummies," like episode count or 0 at episode count, and I'd move on with my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that
pull
just
them out
depends
as-
on the API they've
depends
given
on-
you, right?
Depends on the API. And I Google around a little bit here, and I can see comments on what's new for. Like, here we go. Here's an article at C# Corner that talks about JSON node, which is that abstract class, JSON object, which does allow you to like both create and pull things out. And then I was thinking about doing stuff what I thought would be friendlier, like this.
Yep.
Which seems somewhat friendly to me.
Have you tried that yet?
Well, I'm trying and failing because I'm not I'm not holding in my mind, as people are probably yelling at us, that we have this JSON object. That's actually not an array right there. That's total count, and I'm not thinking. So that should literally just be total count. And the next one will fail. I'll just let it fail. I'm also counting on this thing to box this up and tell me whatever type it's going to be. Let's find out. Hit F5, parse, total count. So there you go. I was overthinking it.
Yeah.
That came out automatically. The JSON object figured it out, and total count. Now, here's the funny thing, though. Total count looks like an int, not an int.
What do you mean it looks like an int?
Well, it looks like an int because I'm saying it looks simplistically. You hover over it, and you're like, look, like it has a number. It looks like a simple type. But because I was being sloppy with var, I'm saying, I don't know. You figure it out, right? Tell me what you think it's going to be. And it did. And it came out as another node, right? So then you have to
and
ask
just to be clear,
yourself,
though, when you say you figure it out, that's nothing to do with runtime. Like that's
no, I know. It's totally
that's
100%. I can hover. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It's not
I
going
can
to
hover
change
over
anything
var,
if you make that int.
and
right?
it's clearly telling me that.
Yeah.
So then I can go and say, well, what is it? Convert to int, or I got to go and pull out the dot path of the thing. I just want to get the value of the thing as value. Let's see if that gives me an int.
That would be a method, right?
As a method. Cast
And what does it return? What type does it return?
The derived JSON value type. Then it's going to be a JSON value.
JSON value, right?
Which is another thing I got to go and dig into, right? And then figure out. Or, it could be a nullable int or whatever, right?
Well,
it's going to be something, right? It's going to be an int. And now I have a proper.
An int
now I have a
makes
proper.
it an int. That's
well,
that's the thing you have to like get in your head.
It's an int
right?
now. It's an int now.
It's an actual int.
Yep.
Well, you cast it. That's why.
I cast it. Like I forced it. I was like, "You're going to be an int because I told you so."
And well, and even then, it's not that straightforward, right? There must the value has to have been one that the runtime is allowing you to cast it to an int, which means that there's either an implicit operator or something like that. Yeah.
Right. And there's two runtimes to think about here. There's what JSON is thinking about as it's parsing. There's the CLR itself, and then there's what's happening here where we have no idea. var in the compiler has no idea what's going to come out. It says JSON value. So unless I explicitly go like that and force it, I don't know if that won't cause a runtime problem.
It may very well cause a runtime issue, right? Yeah.
Right. Let's find out.
It probably won't because you've done as
value.
It
won't. It won't because it is an int. And then, it's an int. It was an int at the moment in time.
It is now an int. It doesn't mean that it was an int. I mean, this is a subtlety, right?
No, this is a great point, and let's fight about that for a second, because you're absolutely right. It is a value that is easily coercible into an int at runtime, and I was given grace.
It's not coercible because the compiler didn't do anything. So.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about the word coercion. That's a good point.
So like typically when we talk about these, my understanding anyway is that coercion is something that's going to happen when we talk about C# and .NET, is the compiler may be able to coerce something, right? But at runtime, what's happening? Cast. Yeah, at runtime, someone in the runtime has to give you an int back, like an object that is being stored in the runtime of type int, and anything can be turned into an int if it has an implicit operator.
Well, and here's the deal. So if you look at this surprising thing, this is a list of operator overloads, explicit operator overloads. There they are. This is a defined explicit conversion to the int of a given JSON node.
That's it.
I've got a JSON node. I said, give me the value underneath it, the held value, and effectively call the explicit operator overload. Did you just flip yourself too?
What was that?
You just like
like I said, my it's tearing, it's doing all types of terrible stuff.
Fine. Okay, cool. So that gives me total count. So this is actually not horrible. I don't hate this, but we do want to point out that there are lots of ways that we could have potentially done that, right? So then we've got JSON object at 1, which here is episodes, right? I suppose I could probably ask for it by name, episodes. Right, as array. In this case, it's going to end up being a JSON array. Then the question is a JSON item, a JSON object going to allow me to enumerate through that? Is this thing, implement IEnumerable? Let's hit F5 and see what happens when we go through here. We're going to just F10. Now we have an item of 12. Look at that. This is actually kind of clean. It did not, to be clear, we're not deserializing. See, I'm trying to zoom in and capture that moment at the same time. So forgive me. This is a flaw in the zooming tool. There we go. So what we got here is a JSON object, which looks like an array, but it's actually kind of a hash table-y thing. So I can ask for it by ordinal value or by name. And this is going to make it really convenient for me to go and say, give me the title, give me the URL, go, right? But correct me if I'm wrong, I could have made a C# object that expressed as a projection of that roughly,
so at this
and
point,
deserialized it.
If you know that the shape of what you want to get out is just a subset of these things, I think it would be far simpler at this point to simply declare that type and then just use the top level deserialize method to say, please deserialize this JSON blob into.
Will the top level deserialize thing ignore the stuff I don't care about?
Yeah.
Okay.
It should. If it doesn't, I'm wrong, but that would be really strange that you can't. It would fail because it has a value that it can't put in because there's no spot for it.
Is this an opportunity to use a record?
Yeah.
Does JSON should deserialize into records?
I don't see why it wouldn't. The only thing that would be an issue potentially is when if you use things like primary constructors and stuff, but I believe that would all be supported. I'd be very surprised if they didn't implement that.
Cool. So, records are kind of like, how would you describe them? They're not structs. They're just kind of like friendlier, easier ways.
Well, there are record structs. Records are a language feature. They're not a type system feature. A runtime type system versus the language's representation of those types. But there are now record structs in C# 10. But before that, records were more like classes.
Okay. So if we say public record show, and then we say, public, oops, are you in there or is that me making a mistake?
That's not me.
Sorry. Public record show. And then, I usually go like prop tab. And I think about like, okay, what do I need? So I'm looking I'm in a breakpoint here. I'm writing in the debugger, and because the benefits of that is I can see what's going on down here in the bottom. That's why I'm writing this in the debugger. So here's the things that I need, right? So what do I need? I need the title. Now I can say set an init, which is only let me, set it once. And then I'll go and say, I need the URL, I need the title, I need the entry ID, I need the description. Right? URL. description. Now, I'll do it for the purposes of hopefully simpler deserialization. I will give them the exact same names.
Yeah.
That way I don't have to do any mapping, right? That's all I really want. I don't need more. So I'm hoping that it will pick those out. That's what we're assuming here, right? That we're going to be able to deserialize. So here's our example of getting a string. So now I have an item. How do I say item as object?
So what I would do personally is
give me my thing.
Not do it as JSON object or JSON node at all at this point. I would
create too late, man.
What's that?
It's too late, man.
No, it's not. Like you can create so you've got your show type, but you can have a type above that, or you can just ask it for a list of shows, and it'll find the member. So go back to your JSON. What is the member in the JSON payload? The episodes, right?
Yeah. Well, it's sitting right now in items. Like I've already got it there.
Oh, I see.
Ready to go.
Okay.
So my point is that I have a JSON object as fragment, right?
As fragment. Okay.
I have a piece of it. I have a node. Yeah. I want to deserialize this here. So what I want to do.
I don't know. I've never deserialized a node. You could either try the JSON serializer stuff. There's actually a JSON serializer class, static class, which has a bunch of helper methods on it, and it takes so that's what you want. It takes JSON node. So JSON serializer.deserialize. And there'll be a generic version of that is my guess.
Yeah. So deserialize as show.
Yep. And then you give it your item.
And then we say item.
Yep.
And then we say var show. I know that there's people who are screaming who are like old heads that are like var, why all the vars? Less typing for me. Don't care. Item.
I think you need to put your record declaration last. Is that what it's complaining about?
No, that was done way up at the top.
No, what's the actual error? I mean,
they're mad at me because top level statements must precede namespace and type declarations.
Right. So you need to put your.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Brain fart.
You need to put your type declaration at the bottom.
That's me being a C person and thinking that C, put all the stuff at the bottom, put all the stuff at the top rather than the bottom.
Okay.
Because this is a top level application, you want to really have your using, and then there's your first line.
There's your top levels.
And I was randomly declaring a class in the middle somewhere. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go ahead and hit F5. I know that you have a hard stop, so we might have to make a part 2 here.
Yeah.
So let's hit F10.
And what does the show give us?
Look at that.
Beautiful.
Oops, let me try to zoom in on that again. I got to capture it, so I'm going to hit that. They're not going to let me do it. There you go. So that deserializer took that JSON object. So we just switched from kind of a loosely typed, kind of a laterly typed thing, and then suddenly decided to like nail it down. And now we got a real object. We have a projection of just the couple things we wanted.
We asked the serializer to do all the hard work for us. That's basically what we did, right? We said we have a type that we've defined, which has a shape. Yep. And then we have some JSON. In this case, it was a JSON node because we pulled it out of a larger JSON document. And then we said, can you fit this blob of JSON into an instance of this type, please? And then it did its defaults. It went, okay, well, you've got a property called whatever that is of .NET type, whatever else. Can I fit, is there a JSON property or member of that name? And does it have a value that I can turn into the type that it needs to be for your .NET value?
So let's make sure that people understand the reason that we didn't why didn't you just do that from the beginning? Well, my analysis was that making an object that was shaped the way I wanted it was going to be more hassle. So what I did is I used more loosely typed things to dig down to this moment, this highlighted purple area here. And then I went to the deserializer. Yes, you could certainly have described something that was shaped more correctly, right? And skipped that and digging here. But it also showcases the flexibility of what's available to us, right?
Absolutely. And so at this point, we could, in theory, create a new type that represents the final result.
Well, and honestly,
that we want.
We could do that, or show's pretty darn close. I might just make a list of those.
You could, but I mean, even if you want the what were you pulling out before? Episode count or something? Is that gone now? Total count.
Total count is
there, right? Line 16.
Yeah, it's right
so
here. Yeah.
you could remove digging into the JSON object just by having a type that is the shape of the response from the API.
Yeah. So that could be less magic string, and I could just pull that right out as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're starting to get a little shaky here too, and your audio and your video are out of sync.
Oh dear.
So I think we'll probably call this a show, but let's hit F5 and make sure that we can actually do this thing completely. So I'm going to just hop back out to my my command line here. That's actually going to fail because it's not really JSON. So that was a mistake. I've angered the beast. Here we go. .NET run. Now look at that. So that is calling that API and outputting just titles.
Yep.
So that's proved that I can do that. So then now I need to, maybe next episode, you and I will then fan out, and we will do it either synchronously, which is easy, put a for loop around it and go as many pages as you need to, or identify the number of pages and send out 30 or 5 at a time or whatever in a parallel event. And then we'll return back a list of shows that have the things we want. We'll call our batch in a similar way and then save that to storage, and we'll be done. But hopefully this has provided some value to some folks so they understand the kinds of thinking that you would apply when solving these things. And even the mixing and matching of styles. Like, it would have worked if we'd done it your JSON document way. It would have worked if we'd done it all JSON deserializer way. But doing a mix of it doesn't make for nasty looking code. I don't know. Some people probably don't like that intermediate object there,
Well, a lot of this goes, I mean, as I said,
a lot of tidying up that can be done.
Iteration is what the name is the name of the game, right? When doing code, no one is expecting people to perfectly code the right result the first time they sit down at the keyboard for any given problem. It is all about iteration. And in this case, where there's 2 people doing the iteration and we're learning a few APIs, we might have a bunch of foundational knowledge, but I haven't ever actually used this specific API in .NET because I always use the higher level stuff for the types of stuff I'm doing. But I understand the concepts like you do, and so we go and look at the docs, we explore, we use the debugger, and we figure it out as we go.
Yep. Exactly. And in some cases, of course, we see that there are squiggly lines that are telling us that, like, this could be null. It is absolutely true that I could be pulling out a thing that doesn't exist and I wouldn't be able to tell you until runtime. So this is not yet defensive code by any means. Right. So that's another thing to think about. Cool. Well, thanks for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So if you've enjoyed this kind of stuff, and if you want to see more coding, whether it be with me and Damien or me and David Fowler or Maria or any of our friends on the .NET team, leave some comments and we'll get you some more content like this. And we'll see you again another time.